Well, guys, it's 9 o'clock, so I think we'll get started here. Thanks to everybody for coming. I'm April Sundby, the administrator at the Sand Hill River Watershed District. This is Zach Herman. He's our engineer from Houston Engineering, our district engineer. We are recording this meeting just to let you guys know so that we can post it onto our website when it's over in case other people have questions and want to hear what went on today. Then we'll have it out there for the public. So I guess we're just going to start. We do have a presentation planned, but if you didn't get copies of it, it's on the front table up there, if you'd like. And there's also a letter from MnDOT, and that's kind of what prompted this meeting. In the past, there was circulation of discussions about what drainage opportunities there were out in the Vesledahl wetland banking site. And a lot of the discussions were surrounding a legal ditch system. To have a legal ditch system formed, you had to have 60% of the landowners over which the ditch passes. And MnDOT was not favorable at that time in signing a legal ditch petition. They have since changed, and they've put it in writing that they would be supportive of that right now. And they've explained in the letter why they would be supportive of. We have two representatives from MnDOT here today, so I don't know if they'd like to speak on that later in the meeting, but for now or whatever.
Well, first I'll just say JT, our district engineer, couldn't be here today, so I'm Josh Dickerson. I'm the land management supervisor out of Bemidji.
Okay.
And this is Rachel Miller. She's our hydraulics engineer. And really, I asked her to help me out because I hurt my leg and needed a driver, but she knows quite a bit about drainage. So.
Okay. So if we have questions later on in the meeting after you hear about the presentation, they'd be here to answer some of those things. But we at the Watershed District felt like that was a really good step in the right direction for landowners if this is an opportunity that they choose to take. So today, we just wanted to present you with some of the facts and the procedures that surround the opportunities that are coming your way, if that is what the landowners choose to do. So we'll just get started. Kind of went through the history a little bit. There was some landowner concerns for the drainage the main drainage way that goes through the Vesledahl wetland banking site. Like I said, there's been some past landowner interest for local control over the drainage. And until 2023, MnDOT did not support this legal ditch petition, but we've kind of found a path forward where they're willing to support that. What is a drainage authority? In this watershed district, we are the drainage authority for that. So the board or the county could be the drainage authority, but like I said, in this instance, we are the drainage authority. And construction of new drainage systems or improvements would come through the watershed district via petition. And petition would come forth to the Board of Managers. So until a petition comes forward, the Watershed District Board is really hands-off. It's landowner driven. There are procedures that we need to follow via statute to establish a system. Right now, we're at the very beginning stages. We're doing due diligence. It's not required. We're trying to facilitate landowner meetings to communicate procedures, opportunities, things like that. When a petition comes forward, we would move through the process. You can get public input. It's not required, but we like to have that all along through the process. There's a preliminary survey and a hearing, a detailed survey report. Viewers go out to establish benefits, and then there's a final hearing. So there's a statutory process that needs to be followed to be able to get to your end goal. Who can file a petition? There's a couple of pathways to do it. The majority of owners of property that the proposed drainage system passes over, or property owners owning at least 60% of the drainage area the proposed system passes over. That was the pathway in the past that landowners were looking at going through, was the second option. Who pays for the maintenance of the drainage system? The cost for repairing a drainage system is proportioned out amongst all the property owners in the benefit area that have been assessed for benefits for that assessed system. So after you get through the process, the viewers would establish who those particular landowners are that benefit from that drainage system. They're determined by viewers. The benefits are determined by the viewers. The drainage authority, which in this case, like I said, is the watershed district, would appoint the viewers. They have to be non-biased. They consist of disinterested residents of the state. They have gone through training and they're qualified to assess benefits and damages. There would be hearings so that you guys could see in advance what your benefits might look like, and you have an opportunity to contest them or just have the discussion about why they view your property as a benefit or not. I think from here on, we're going to pass it over to Zach to go through some of the other things that go.
Sure, sounds good. Thanks, April. As April mentioned, my name is Zach Furman. I work with Houston Engineering and do quite a bit of work with the watershed district. So what I'm going to go through, just dive into a little bit more detail on what it looks like to set up a drainage system. So you guys have that in mind as we kind of move forward here. So first thing, just to jump in terms of how benefits and damages are determined. So the next couple slides, we'll go through kind of how they're determined. This first step here is kind of statutorily what's looked at or what's in state law that's looked at in terms of benefits. So one thing to point out is state land, government land, public roads, all those type of things can be evaluated for potential benefit within the system. So in a lot of our drainage systems, you know, we do have where road authorities, for example, are assessed a drainage benefit by residing, essentially draining their water into that system. So there is that statutory authority through a drainage system to assess benefits back to you know, public entities essentially. So big thing I want to point out is this is something that, you know, through the this subdivision 6 is something that, you know, during new systems, especially on larger systems that we hear a lot about during the hearing, it's actually mandated now within this statute that benefits will be considered on a watershed basis, meaning that typically what that results in is benefits are assessed to property owners to some varying degree of benefit based on outletting their water to the system. So, you know, the proverbial, you're up higher in the watershed at the top of the hill. The viewers generally look at that as if there's a value, an indirect value of having a system that receives your water essentially. So I just want to point that out because that is something that in most ditch systems we do see now. So in terms of kind of the meat and potatoes, I guess, in terms of how benefits are determined, there's really a whole lot of different ways the viewers look at benefits. You see that a few of the variables listed up there, you know, they use a lot of things like soils maps. They'll look at obviously what the drainage area is. There's a lot of going back and forth with what the detailed engineer's report calls out for hydraulic benefit to assign benefits. And then it's a lot of, you know, kind of viewing the land, looking at productivity estimated with or without the system. And from there, then assigning benefits to the landowners. So each system, I would say, is a little bit unique in how it's tackled with the viewers. But in general, there's kind of the whole point here is there's a whole suite of data available that's used to come up with what that first cut of benefits would look like. So maybe what I'll do is just to show you an example of what this looks like. This is a larger drainage system that we have in the western portion of the watershed district. So this is this Climax to Beltrami neighborhood. The system is actually this red and yellow dashed line that you see here. So that's where the actual drainage channel exists. When that project was established back in 2005, the watershed district worked with viewers, and the viewers went out and determined what the drainage benefits that were received from that system. I shouldn't say drainage benefits, just benefits in general, drainage being the major benefit for that system. And what they arrive at is a colorful map that looks something like this. And what this essentially tells you is depending on where you reside within that benefit area, there's different rates of benefit applied. So people next to the system in general are usually a higher benefit rate than those that are, say, further away from the system where their water just is received by the system essentially. So there's a rate applied to each of those areas. And then the way the way that works in terms of how funding for maintenance and things like that is allocated back to landowners is any levies against those properties are proportioned to those benefit rates. So if you're in an area that receives twice the benefit as another area, your assessment would be twice that dollar amount essentially for those acres. So everything kind of relates back to this. And this really, when the viewers go out and do their thing, this is kind of a first cut at this. And like April mentioned, there's the final hearing. That's an opportunity for people to kind of protest what the viewers have come up with. In general, at least the systems I've been involved with, that hearing will actually get, they'll essentially stop the hearing without finishing it to allow the viewers to go back out and research each one of those issues on a case-by-case basis. And I would say in most cases, we do see adjustments made based on things that landowners bring forward through that process. So in terms of funding maintenance for a system, there are statutory limits. So when one of these systems does get set up, and you see that map with those benefit rates, so like that last map we looked at, the total benefits the viewers determined that exist out there was, I believe, about $6 million in total benefits. That doesn't give the watershed the ability to just start assessing uncontrolled essentially against those acres. There are limits that apply to how much can be assessed strictly for maintenance. First of those limits is 20% of the benefit amount can be assessed to landowners, or $100,000, whichever one of those is greater. And that $100,000 statute is really in there to recognize that a lot of these systems were constructed at the turn of the century. There's viewers reports from 1895, I think is maybe one of the oldest ones in the watershed district. And at that time, the dollar obviously was worth quite a bit less than it is now. So the benefits might be $10,000 within the viewers report from 100 years ago. Really can't do much for maintenance on systems. And that's when this piece was added to the statute. So in terms of the drainage authority, our role, if a system were to get established, is really to function as the caretaker and the facilitator for the landowners that are benefited by the system. So a drainage system is really kind of owned by the people that benefit from it. We facilitate that through kind of a public setting to implement the system, to kind of keep an eye on the system, perform maintenance as needed, coordinate with landowners, determine what needs to be levied to be able to finance the maintenance, things like that. You see a list of things on the screen there. A couple things I just want to highlight that are kind of a big role that the watershed district plays in all of their systems is, number one, on an annual basis, we do go out and trying to inspect every system in the watershed district. Now, there's a lot of miles of drainage system and we do the best we can, but we still do rely on landowners to bring things forward. So, I think on the western side of the watershed district, we try and identify what we can, but we still rely on landowners to kind of report if they see an issue and things like that. And then we do our best to get out there, look at it, figure out what needs to be done and try and fix it. So that's one thing I want to highlight. The next thing I want to highlight is determining what that levy will be. So the watershed district on an annual basis looks at all their systems collectively, determines what the levy is going to be for that year. And I would say in general, the policy in the past has been, the district's goal is to avoid kind of sharp ups and downs in what that assessment looks like, and try and look at it over the long haul to keep it kind of a low, steady amount so that account can build. Because obviously when you're dealing with maintenance, there's a lot of unexpected things that can happen. A big spring flood results in a lot of sedimentation in the channel and you want to clean it out. You really got to have the funds there available to do that. So I just wanted to highlight that in terms of maintenance, in terms of how the watershed district tackles those type of issues for the system. So in general, what does this mean for all of y'all and landowners in this particular area? So I'm going to hit on this, and April, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong here, but the district essentially has about $34,000 that's allocated specifically for this system. $34,000 is something that could be used to go forward and develop a drainage system. I think the concern of the district is $34,000 in terms of what we're going to accomplish for cleaning. Not sure on how far we get with that. And then once it's spent, we have no financial mechanism to ever go back to do future cleanings. It's a big concern. So, and then April mentioned this already, but MnDOT's affirmed support for doing a system through the letter that was distributed at the beginning of the meeting. Slide's a little redundant. I'll just dive into a little bit more detail on what these steps consist of. I apologize for the small print, but you guys can see this in your packet as well. But just the general process, if we were to establish a drainage system, the first step, called it due diligence. Really, that's kind of what we're doing here today. Obviously, a lot of, when people are just getting into a drainage system, they've never been involved in one before. There's a lot of kind of question marks about what that actually is. So in general, it's not required by statute, but the watershed's pretty committed on those to spend some time ahead of any petition being filed so people understand what they're getting into through a ditch system. The first step statutorily that happens is landowners have to submit a petition. There's some details that go into that, and we've generally worked with landowners on what the petitions have to look like and that type of thing in terms of who signs it, what has to be described within that petition. One thing to note about the petition is, along with the petition, generally a bond is required for costs to go through the final hearing, essentially. So what that number is, we'd have to figure out based on what you guys would want to see for an extent of a system, if anything, essentially. So once we have that petition, another thing, again, not required by statute, but we just kind of consider it good practice with the watershed district, is to invest quite a bit of time in public input. So, one system I can think of, we just completed here about 5 years ago on the west side of the watershed. Petition was submitted, and I want to say we went through probably 4 or 5 kind of informal public meetings where no formal action was taken by the board, but allowed landowners, petitioners, and affected property owners to come in, talk through things, make sure that we have things at a point that is acceptable to the landowners before we get into the legal process, essentially. So what we carry forward through the preliminary hearing, detailed survey report, viewing, final hearing is something that we really want to have ironed out before, in this step, before we actually get into that process where there's official hearings and the board's required to take action and do all that type of thing. So once we do get into that legal process, there's the preliminary survey and hearing. So essentially what that is a report that's filed with the board, as well as I believe it's with Bowser and the commissioner of the DNR are allowed to comment as well. That's filed, that's presented at a public hearing. That hearing is kind of the official capacity to submit comments to the district watershed board. They can take those comments under advisement, direct the engineer to make changes in the detailed survey report. Changes are made in that detailed survey report. That's then filed with the board again. Once that's filed, the board will appoint viewers, which April touched on what those are. Essentially, they're kind of, generally they're appraisers. They're people that are kind of experts in land value. They work with the engineer on what drainage benefits may look like is kind of a big piece of that. They come back with a draft viewers report. And then we get into the final hearing, and that's where the detailed engineer's report and the benefits are presented to the landowners. People bring protests to the assessment forward. There gets to be a lot of back and forth. Like I say, that hearing typically occurs over several meetings. We'll get comments from landowners through that process. The hearing will be essentially stopped. They'll investigate those hearings. They'll come back and reconvene the hearing. And it can take 2 or 3 meetings to get through that process, essentially, to get to a point where we've addressed all appeals and things like that. So ultimately, when we get through the final hearing and the final hearing is closed, I don't have it listed on here, but probably the big piece that actually determines if the project goes forward or not is the watershed board, based on what they've learned through this process, makes a determination to either order the project or stop the project. So like I say, in general, we want to kind of, through those light blue boxes, ensure that if before we do this, that this is the project that's going to want to be taken forward. The board has the authority then to order the project in. And what that does is that establishes that as a project based on state statute, establishes the financial mechanism for the project, and then creates the authority to actually go out and implement the project. So after that step happens, there's a few things that happen once the order has been passed. Obviously, if there's construction involved, all that occurs immediately after the project, close out the project. And then these green boxes, that's kind of what I hit on earlier in terms of what the watershed's role as a drainage authority is with the drainage project after it's established. So it's really kind of it's tough to see on the screen, but you can see it in your handout. And those arrows are an attempt to show you that really is a circular process that occurs on an annual basis. There's inspection, trying to keep up on the issues on the system. A lot of times we identify things and we don't take action immediately. We kind of deem that we're going to monitor this for a few years and then take action maybe later, but we try and inventory all that, keep track of what's needed for issues, ultimately kind of facilitate the repairs when it's needed. So the purple boxes you see on the bottom, those are actually things that happen. Those are things in the future that could be initiated by landowners and or the watershed district. The first one, redetermination of benefits. So there is a process. Let's say this system's out there for 50 years. There's a desire to update the benefits to whatever modern day looks like in 50 years. There's a process that either the board or landowners can start that. Or if there's a desire to have improvements or laterals or anything like that with the system, there's a process that's 100% landowner initiated. So landowners would submit a petition similar to starting a new drainage system and then start the process all over again, essentially. So, you know, I think some of you have seen this map. Again, it's hard to see on the screen. I do have big copies printed out if we want to talk after the meeting or anything. It's in your packet. The drainage system, real rough, just tried to lay out the main channels through the system. I mean, it's really up to the petitioners for what they want for a first cut, the channels. There's about 80, just under 8,400 acres that drain. The channel that drains through the banking site and then all the way down through to the Sandhill River is about 8,300 acres, or the area in red that you see on the map. Yep. And then the light blue line is about 10.5 miles of channel. Again, that's totally just a first cut. That's up for debate. If this was something you want to go forward with, you know, there's a lot of considerations. Do we need that extent? Do we want to add more to ensure, you know, I believe we've referred to them as neighborhood ditches in the past, but some of the ditches that maybe aren't the main ditch, but they're critical for water to get through the site to access the ditch, things like that. So there's a lot of consideration on what that might look like. And one thing, you know, there would be some investment required to establish the system, and we just want to be open about that. You know, there's a 34,000 that could be put towards it right now, but we do have to go through the full legal process. That means whatever's selected, the channel would have to be surveyed. We have to develop the preliminary and detailed survey reports, conduct the hearings, hire viewers, all that type of thing. Until we know what you'd want to see out there, it's hard to really tell you exactly what that number is going to be. But then also, those costs, essentially, whatever's above the 34,000 would likely be required through a bond from the petitioners. If the project goes through, those funds are then rolled into the project essentially and put back onto the benefiting landowners. If it doesn't go through, then it's the responsibility of the petitioners. So another thing to keep in mind too is if we do this survey, and you know, if the state of the channel now shows that we want to remove sediment and reaches and things like that, we may want to go do that work as part of the establishment of the system after the project was ordered. So there could be some costs associated with that as well that would be put back on the benefiting landowners. So with larger systems, I don't foresee that large of an investment for implementation, but larger systems where there's a lot of construction, generally the board will solicit like a 10-year bond, or I think 10 has been kind of the standard we've used, maybe longer, but idea there is just to keep the annual assessment down, essentially, if there are larger construction.
This one would be a lot more affordable, so it maybe wouldn't even need to go 10 years.
Yep. So that's a whole lot of information about drainage law, but we wanted to kind of put this out there for you guys because of the letter that came from MnDOT. You know, it may change things out there if this is something you guys want to see forward. It's a path, I think, as I can speak for the watershed, that in terms of long-term maintenance of the system would certainly provide that through a financial mechanism to ensure that we can perform maintenance not only now, but 5-10 years from now as additional maintenance is needed. So it takes time to get through the process. I'm not going to promise that it's going to be done by this fall or something. You know, typically these legal processes, there's appeal periods. It takes time to conduct some of the technical stuff that has to happen. So I would say we'd be sitting in a good place if orders could happen in about a year from now, to be quite honest. That means everything lines up pretty well too. So it could be longer.
So with that, I have asked, Paul Engelstead, put him on the spot here. He's from a local landowner from Fertile, and he has gone through this process before. So I asked him to come here today just to kind of share with you what his experience was like, getting a petition, going through and getting the signatures and what the bond looked like and you know, what the outcomes were for the people in his area. So, and then you can ask him questions because we're on this side of it, you know, the support side for landowners. But what does it look like for a landowner to actually go through the process? So, Paul, if you don't mind, that would be great if you could share that.
As April said, she just asked me I'm not here representing the watershed. I'm probably more in your guys' camp than I would be on theirs, you know, but at the same time, we had and by that I mean, obviously, we as in landowners and renters, we had an issue there, and if you're curious what it looks like, I'm not gonna get into the project that we did, but just so you understand, well, it's on page 11. Up the middle of the page, you look at in the yellow area. You look on the upper end of that, what Zach was talking about, where you see the yellow and the red dot in project 17, the upper end of it, it says ditch 80s. So that was a ditch similar.
Closer to the mic, maybe, just in case.
That was a ditch that was similar to what, you know, was an established ditch, but what it needed, it's a little different. It had a legal ditch number, but it needed an improvement. An improvement's the same process as what you guys are looking at, from what I understand. So what did it look like from my point of view? We had land that we owned, so as a farmer, land that we owned, and then land that we rented in the same system. So it started with a conversation like this. It got to the point where it needed to be a petition, and somebody had to spearhead the petition from the landowners. So the gist of what I would say to you guys, the process comes from the landowners to the watershed. Am I right on that? It doesn't come from the watershed to you guys. They're trying to help, but it can't be, they can't come and tell you should do this. You guys need to come to them and say, we want this, and not everybody's gonna want it. I get that. So, I mean, the process is it's a little scary at start. Somebody's got to spearhead it. Somebody's got to get a petition going and go to an attorney, and the watershed will help with that, meaning, so I went to an attorney in Crookston and drew up the initial petition, which then gets, I don't remember the exact process, but the gist of it is, from my point, is then you got to circulate the petition. So, and get as many landowner signatures on board as you can. That was about
Did you go door to door, or how did you do that?
just took the petition door to door with the people that I knew or represented, and then also had the other farmers that, you know, obviously the ones that are the most concerned and that were that needed the project more than anything were the ones that were spearheading it, you know. So I had a couple other guys that were helping. And not everybody was in favor, you know. They just, obviously as a farmer, it was something that we felt we needed to do, but as a landowner, if you're a retired landowner that doesn't farm, you know, you're looking at some costs, you know, so eventually it's gonna get assessed back. So ultimately, in the end, after a lot of discussion, I think we had 80-90%. I don't know.
You only needed 29% because yours was an improvement.
We didn't,
Correct?
but yeah, but we
Yeah.
didn't
You
want to
wanted-
force something either. And I think ultimately, we got just about everybody that signed on. There was one that was really drug his feet for a long time, and eventually he obviously wasn't a farmer, but he saw the benefit of having better drainage for his land. So there's a value in as a non-farmer, if you have a drainage system that, the way I look at it, ultimately you own the system, right? As a farmer, when it's done, or not as a farmer, as a landowner, you now have a system that you own it.
It's infrastructure on your land.
So, it took a couple years, I guess. I think I grabbed that file this morning and looked at it. I think we started it. Well, the actual petition shows 2017, and I think the dirt work was done, started in 19 and finished in 20. What does it look like from, again, I'm not here to say you should or shouldn't do it. we initially had a plan or an idea that we sent as a petition. What I asked you to look at there was that project 80. So that blue line above the red and the yellow is what we did. So if I had anything to think about, maybe the two laterals that you see going to the south there, as you start getting into this and you start looking at, okay, we have the main ditch. So I don't know what your system looks like now, but it has the main ditch. What can we do to make that, if you have that fixed, what can you do to fix contributing water, and how do you fix it the right way? So what we had a problem was on that situation is the water ran more or less right where it says public ditch 80. That's where a lot of the water actually went. We couldn't get the water into the ditch. It was running cross country, and we were getting a lot of erosion, plugging road ditches, and the water was going over land and over roads and things like that. So it's one thing to clean the ditch, but if you don't get the water in it in an orderly manner, inlet culverts, things like that, but everybody had a chance to say, look, now is where you can, on your own stuff, this is where the water is on this 80 and where it comes from. This is where I need an inlet pipe, and those things can be built into it as you go. Some of the things I ran into with rented ground, some long discussions with landowners from Mike. So how do you go to someone that owns land and doesn't really, if they're retired and they're just not something they want to spend money on, how do you deal with that? Well, beating around the bush, ultimately there's a couple ways to deal with it. One, hopefully they sign it and want to see the value in their land because they're getting they're getting a drainage system for it. But point blank, as a renter, maybe it's going to cost X. Sooner or later, you're going to find out what it's going to cost you per acre. I know of a couple different, if we're losing 5 or 10 acres in this corner of the field every year anyway, and I'm paying you X for rent, and you fix that problem, can afford to pay you a little more rent. Maybe we share to it. Maybe I ain't beating around the bush, but that's how you get around it, guys. I'm not advocating for anything. Maybe it's a 25-75, maybe it's half and half. I don't know, but that's the conversations that we had. I'm not saying I don't know, but you got to address if you're making a better system. The erosion thing is a big deal for us out there. A lot of that stuff went away with the inlet pipes do work. They slow that water down and it keeps your channel open. And you got a channel that you can maintain and mold. So, anybody got any questions for me that?
Well, what have your experience been with the watershed district? Have we been responsive when you need maintenance? You haven't probably needed much maintenance, but.
After the fact, yeah, we have not had much issues there with the system since it got finished. The watershed was frankly really good to work with as far as from an engineering standpoint, and what we came back more than one time with different ideas as to how to, from other landowners and input, the main thing is trying to address everybody's concerns if you're doing it, not just the one person that's pushing the thing. It's got to address everybody's if you're going to get everybody to help contribute.
The percentage of landowners have to approve this before it gets started, 100%, 80%.
For this particular one, the establishment, it's 60%. This was a little different because this was an improvement. But for the context of this conversation, you need 60% of over which the ditch passes. Now, if I remember right, now this was before I was administrator, before MnDOT signed on, the potential was that there was 57%. And MnDOT pushed it over substantially because they have a substantial amount of land in the area. I mean, and that's hypothetical if all of those 57% were still interested. Don't know that till you start asking questions and see where everybody's at.
That's 57% of page 17. The whole
I'm sorry.
watershed, 50-70%.
So I remember, exactly, you probably remember more than I do, but
It was like, I think it, well, get without, and that was 57% over which times, so.
and it was that was the all.
In your instance, Paul, that was the county ditch prior to the watershed taking. Was it a county ditch?
It was.
So the
county-
question was, is the one that Paul's referring to, is that a county ditch before it turned over to the watershed ditch? It was.
So from my understanding on it, if the landowner, if you got a legal ditch, so that was a legal ditch at that time, was ditch 8. I could have went to the watershed and requested a cleaning, am I right? Just
You
as-
couldn't because it was a county ditch. So
But-
you'd had to go to the county to request the cleaning.
Okay.
Yep.
So you can go request a cleaning as a landowner, you know, and then go out, look at it and see if we can do some cleaning. But the problem with the ditch was it just wasn't constructed right in the first place. Everybody kind of knew it. We couldn't get the water in it. You could have cleaned it, but it couldn't get the water over to it. So it needed the laterals. And there was 3 laterals that were put onto that. So the whole system was improved to get the water to it and it works, okay? When it's worked, it's a big improvement in the area. And once it's done, those that were kind of hesitant about it. No one's come back and said, I sure wish we wouldn't have done it, you know, when it got done. Those that were skeptical, could see the benefits after the fact. But it's not everybody's gonna be, not everybody's got the same position.
But I appreciate you coming and giving your perspective. I'm sure if people have more questions, I can give your number out to them and
It's fine.
would that be okay? Thanks, Paul. Minda, do you have anything to say about the presentation that was given? Agree, disagree?
I guess I don't have any comments other than, I just want to in person represent that our district decided that this is the best way rather than, I think what we've been doing is just piecemeal coming and getting individual permits, clean it out. And this would be a more systematic way to do it. I think that's the intent of why we think that's a better solution in the long run. Rather than putting it on the individual landowner to come in one at a time and just to make better relations with the neighbors.
Would I be correct to say that, and this would be a landowner question probably, but in the past, there's been concern that MnDOT owns the land now, but they might not always own the land, and it could go to private ownership. And the conversations that I've heard from landowners is, well, what happens if MnDOT isn't the landowner? And we have obstructions or it needs cleaning. And that landowner says, I like beaver dams, or I don't want you, I'm not gonna give you permission to come in and clean it, even though it impacts, you have common law and things like that, but by then your crops may have already been damaged. And so that was a viable concern that some landowners had. If the land were to change hands from MnDOT's property ownership. So this was one avenue that was explored to alleviate some of those concerns. Dave from Bowser, he's here. I don't know, do you have any comments or questions or?
Just a couple, I'm Dave Warren, I'm with Bowser, and I've been coming to these meetings, I've seen some of you over the years, I try and come up with a landowner meeting just to hear. Of course, we'll always be here because we have responsibility for the wetland bank needs, so we're never going away. So it's our interest to work with you to manage these issues that are happening in that site, and MnDOT's been our good partner to work on those. I think the last half dozen years did a good job of dealing with some specific issues, and now this permit process, so we're trying to create ways to try and deal with issues that you experience as a result of this wetland bank, this large wetland restoration that's been done. We are also supportive of this process. We are a landowner within the watershed. We own 78 acres as an agency as well, as a separate from MnDOT. So we have a role to play, and the $34,000, that's money that came from Bowser originally. The purpose of that money was to pay for, maintain that main line ditch that runs through it.
After the DNR was to take it over. we
Yes,
could use
yes,
it.
yeah,
Correct.
that's right. That's a important therapist. Well, that's why it's been in limbo since 2004, because you can't use it
It's been
because,
sitting there collecting interest since then because
Yeah.
DNR hasn't taken it over.
but we have in turn, authorized that if you go down the path of working through this public ditch process, those funds can be used to offset some of those costs. Because from our perspective, the purpose is to maintain that mainline ditch. So either it pays for it directly or it pays through this process to get to that, to the same place. So from our perspective, it's kind of the same difference. So that's kind of why we allow that funds to be used for that purpose. And I think quite honestly, if this could be a way to create more control on your part, but also I think more comfort that when there are issues with water associated with this bank site and the ditch, that then there's a process to deal with them that kind of works for the watershed district. So that's part of our interest. And so I'm here not to push or anything, just indicate kind of where we're at, because we do have interest in the site. But ultimately, it does become your decision as landowners collectively on, as Zach has and people have talked about, go through the process or not. I mean, either way, we'll continue to work with you and with MnDOT or wherever the future owner is to try and deal with issues as they arise, because our interests are always going to be there through that wet banking.
I don't know. As a, April asked me, what does it look like from my side, as you get further west, we do a lot of these, deal with more of these county ditches than you guys do around here, but if I remember right, when this is all done, there's typically a fund balance in each ditch, am I right?
Correct.
So if something needs to be done, April said, what's it like after the fact? Once it's done, I don't know, there's a culvert that has a problem, or you got there's always these maintenance issues, What happens if you don't have what the watershed helps with in that case, I can call April or whatever, they can go out and they can take a look, say, yeah, you know what, the end of this culvert is washed out, or whatever it might be. There's a fund balance that's in that ditch that can pay for that, so you don't have to come back to everybody again and say, all right, we need to do this, and it's gonna cost you this.
Correct.
Right, that's.
Yep, every November, our board, well, Zach and I go out and do the inspections every spring. We create an inspection report for our board, and we let them know immediate maintenance needs. Some of them are things we're just monitoring, but it kind of helps Zach and I recommend what the levy should be for each ditch system annually, and they set those levies every November. So for some systems that are smaller, the levy may look like $5,000 annually, and that gets dispersed among the whole benefited area. And sometimes they use that, sometimes they don't, but it builds up a reserve so that when there is a flood or there is a washout, we have a pot of money to work with. What happens if there's a big flood and you have a big washout and there isn't enough money built up in that fund? The watershed district still takes care of it and you still slowly pay that back, but it doesn't. If the account is in the red because you had a major blowout, that system pays interest back to our reserve. If you're in the green and you have a surplus, you earn interest on that from the reserve. So it kind of works internally that way. But no matter what, that's one of the benefits of a legal system. Like Paul said, if there's something that needs to be fixed, we have the ability to just take care of it instead of coming back out and doing this whole hearing process. Everything is public information, so you can follow along on our minutes that show what things are being looked at every spring and every fall.
Back to our project too, I never touched on on that one. I don't remember the numbers exactly, but it was around $1.5 million roughly. You remember?
For construction.
Give or take.
Yeah, I think, just under $1 million, I think we got it.
Yeah, because you actually had
Yeah.
construction on your project and a lot of it.
Yeah, so that's actually got spent on the project that the landowners needed to pay for. Okay, so on that deal, it got assessed. You had the option as a landowner, I believe you can either pay it up front, right?
You could.
Or it gets put on your taxes over.
I think we did that one 10 Did we go 10 years on that one or did we go 20?
I thought it was 20. but I
Okay,
don't-
could be.
anyway, so that's how it actually worked. So as far as what it cost, you know, so you could do the math on it, it was about 1,500 acres involved in that thing, if I remember right. So anyway, that's how it actually works if you get to that.
This particular system, we haven't surveyed it or anything like that, but we're not looking at construction costs in extreme to what Paul's experience was. This would be just for the establishment of going through the legal proceedings to ensure that you have perpetual maintenance solutions for the rest of the ditch's life.
I would say one thing, and it would be up to the viewers on what they determine as damage rates, but a big part of what the viewers does as well, in addition to benefits, is they look at damages in the system and they're compensated. And generally in a drainage system like this, damages are land rights essentially for the buffer strip, if you will. So we're subject through drainage law to provide a 16.5 or a 1 rod grass strip alongside the channel essentially. So generally that land value for ag land is fairly close to market value because you're removing that ability to use that strip to farm on essentially, and it has to remain in grass. I would suspect that would be an expense that, you know, if the project were to go forward, would be to reimburse landowners for the cost of filter strips.
That being said, they've already given it up without being paid for.
Correct, yeah,
Through the-
yeah. We've actually,
Previous law that was passed.
because of the
Buffer.
quote unquote buffer law, we've actually gone through some of these processes of ditch systems to just provide a financial mechanism to reimburse people for having to give up what they're required to anyway through statute because of that law. So this at least provides a means for compensation for that strip.
Are there any other questions?
So is the idea here that NDOT is gonna retain the ownership forever, or what's going on?
I can't speak to them forever,
I
but
really, I mean, everything I've read about the history of this piece of land is MnDOT has been under the assumption that it would not be retained forever. And I think that's where they're still hopeful that the DNR would eventually turn this into it had a wetland designation at one time. but-
Well, yeah, the original, you're absolutely right, Josh, is that the idea was MnDOT was gonna be a temporary owner until it was established and then turn over to DNR becoming a wildlife management area. That was the plan. In fact, the easement that applies to the property incorporates that in there. It's kind of right there. So it's a public information if you want to see that as well. So there's never an intent for MnDOT to own it forever. And our conversations have been, we want to deal with these issues so that maybe you go back and talk to DNR again, maybe they would take it over as WMA or some other entity, because this is not what MnDOT does. You know, they don't maintain and own restored wetland areas. And they'll do it as long as they need to in our conversation. It's kind of speaking for you, but I've been in all these conversations. But the intent going back to the late 90s when this project got started was MnDOT would be a temporary owner.
I know that's what the intent was, but that hasn't happened, and I thought there was some talk that the watershed board was gonna take over ownership.
we looked at that quite heavily, because it was offered, because according to the statute, they can transfer to other government units. And at the time, our board was not interested. We're in water management, not wetland management. And so for the watershed district, financially, to take on the task of wetland management was not in our bailiwick. And so while that might have helped the landowners, there wasn't a funding mechanism for us to do land management.
I came to DNR back then.
The DNR is not here today, so I hate to speculate. Dave, would you like to take a shot at
Well-
what you think that might be? I mean,
What I recall from the information we got from DNR is that there were just these outstanding issues about water management, and neighboring landowner conflicts were a big part of it. And that's why we've, again, worked on this current process with MnDOT. and why we're supportive of the public ditch. Those issues in theory should go away if these things actually happen. That was a big part of it, is they were not interested in taking over a property that had some conflict with it.
So if this project got started and feasibility study and everything was done and ready to pull the pin on construction, and then it changed hands and the DNR took it over and said, well, wait a minute.
There would be a permanent drainage easement. And that can never go away unless you abandon the ditch as landowners. So this would be an opportunity for protection, to protect your drainage in perpetuity, if this is how you choose to go forward.
Yes.
This is a pathway forward for you. And I think, early on, when I first became administrator in 2019, we tried to look at many different ways. What about just a drainage easement? And we talked about that at length. What would that look like? And that was a hard task to come through. And at the end of the day, I think we're all here thinking, this is the path forward that the state has set for drainage. And there's a reason for it. And it has to do with equity for paying for what maintenance might ever need to be done out there.
Okay, I think Department of Public Information.
Any other questions?
I had one years ago when this first started in DOT, basically bought the Vesledahl. I understood that you don't have meters to apply to other projects elsewhere in the state, but that's it.
That's
Yeah,
true.
wetland.
Yeah.
So they could utilize this wetland. Whether they're doing rules improvement.
They took the credits and transferred them to another area of the state. Is that your question? Your answer?
Correct.
Yes.
I mean, we use, as well say, transfer credits from other projects to this.
The way business is done, I guess.
So one thing too, I don't know if I hit on it super clear, but in terms of how benefits are assessed, obviously that means that landowners in the system are gonna pay a portion for cleanings and things like that. One thing to keep in mind is through that statutorily, state lands can be assessed by the watershed district. Now, I don't know to what degree the viewers would find benefit on these acres, but we do have other systems where like the DNR, for example, or the DOT are assessed benefits for drainage.
Another issue, I think we should look very deeply at what's going to happen in the future by guessing. One is we get some 5 years. I own my own parcel of land out west here, and we have had some 20 years. And yes, no matter what you do, it costs money. But you're going to, have less damage or more damage. But a locally owned business rather than other entity. That's my thought process. Well, you can try it here. I don't see that happening forever. And of course, it costs money to maintain a business. I'm a Norman County Commission, so I said I'm not issue dealing with ditches in Norman County. And one had to look at it was particularly like the ditch tax. Nobody likes to wet either, if you know. So that's my conclusion. One's got to look at the opportunity, may or may not last very long.
Yeah, you do have an opportunity right now.
Yeah.
Because MnDOT is the landowner. They are willing to support moving forward with it, which is a huge opportunity. And you have about $34,000 sitting there that other landowners like Paul didn't have the, that would have been very helpful to you, I'm assuming, when you started it, if you'd have had $34,000 to get going.
We are also going to have some additional expense to undo the damage the DOT did to the ditch system. And they owned it, they plugged up some areas. They restricted the water flow in some areas. If it goes into a private land ownership ditch system, or the county, or whatever, that's, you have control.
I should let Zach speak to this and he can clarify if I'm wrong, but I think that's what you were referring to when you said initially we're gonna have some survey work. And so in the construction plans, when it says this is the established elevations, you can't go back. So whatever the established elevations are at the time of construction is what we can put it back to. So whatever you want now is your chance now to implement it at the very beginning. With maybe you have a better way of wording that.
Correct, yeah, so like through the process, kind of the thing, it'll define what do we want the ditch to be at? That's gonna set kind of in the future, like, well, what are we gonna maintain it to, essentially? So, we wanna make sure that we have that where it's providing adequate drainage, and that may mean through ordering the project, there may be some immediate construction costs there to actually, I'm guessing in a lot of areas, the ditch isn't where you guys want to see it out there. So there's going to be some work to remove sediment and get it down to the level that you guys need to see it for the benefit. So.
And through that process, we're gonna need permits, we're gonna need permissions, we're gonna need.
Yep.
Um,
So those records through that
Yeah,
process
yeah.
essentially dictate like what we can maintain the system to. So that, through that process, it'll define the slope and capacity and elevations and all that type of stuff. And that's the level that we are then mandated to maintain it to.
How much time do we have?
when are you selling?
Selling.
Selling the land. I mean, I think that's what is driving this is the landowners want secure drainage before MnDOT chooses to sell, because you might sell to a private landowner if an opportunity, it might transfer to DNR. You don't know what path that.
I don't know if I figured this out directly or indirectly, somebody told me, but one of the reasons MnDOT's also willing to do this is they think it's gonna make them for a better chance to sell the land. If there's a legal ditch established in the property, so.
For transfers to DNR.
Oh, because then the DNR wouldn't have these problems
Sure.
with drainage, so they would be more appetizing for them to take it over.
It,
Hopefully, right? That's what you're hoping.
it creates more certainty for a future owner because,
Any owner.
Yeah.
yeah, for any owner, I mean, there's a process, something's going on the site, there's a process to deal with it. So that certainty would be of value to a potential future owner.
Marv, they've waited 25 years. I think you've got a little bit of time. I don't know. But it is definitely an opportunity for you to consider and think about what this looks like for you 25 years from now.
April, I have a question. As I understand it, having this legal easement that the watershed would need through the property, through the DNR or the DOT's property as well as private property.
Yep.
That easement has to be purchased by the watershed. What does that process look
That
like?
would be,
How does that get assessed or how does that get purchased? If there's only 34,000 up front, does that?
right, then that gets reassessed to the landowners. Whatever those damage payments are established by the viewers. Then that goes back, the watershed district pays that bill, and through the bond, the landowners
Okay.
pay that back.
I see.
In terms of what the process looks like is the viewers go out and look at what potential damages are by having the drainage easement across their property, and they assess the damage amount, and then we pay based on the damages that are determined by the viewers. Like I say, in Paul's example, the value was fairly close to fair market value for land because we were removing kind of the primary use from that land, being a production. It
Each
sort of
parcel
depends
might
on what
look
the viewer-
different,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Depending on how it's currently being used.
So in some ways, it's a little bit of, from a landowner perspective, we hear this a lot, and honestly, it's probably kind of true. It's taking money out of one pocket, putting it into the other pocket because the system ultimately pays for it, right? But that's how the statute's set up, and that doesn't start until after the project were to go through. So like April mentioned, project will be ordered in. All those costs are accounted for through all the hearings and things. And then the watershed pays for those rights as determined through the viewer's report. And those costs are then assessed back to the benefiting people. So whatever that cost is, each landowner pays a prorated portion based on their benefits.
So Zach, I would assume through those damages that land that's been restored to a natural condition, being a wetland or upland, would have a lower damage rate than land that's currently being cropped.
I would assume so, yeah.
But again, that would be totally up to the viewer.
Sure.
Not up to our watershed board. They have to remain disinterested from that, and that they delegate that to the viewers, and our board stays on this side and the viewers are on that side, determining that. But then again, at your hearings, you know, those are the discussions that would be had at that time.
The 34,000 there, establishment of this. When the 34,000 runs out, does watershed step in at that point and borrow the proposed system, the money to get the project done,
Good question.
and then it's taxed back?
I did ask the attorney that this morning on my way here because I figured that question would come up. So let's just say, for example, you get into the system and the project doesn't go through. That is the responsibility of the petitioner. The watershed district does not have a funding mechanism to do that. That's why you have the bond for your protection going forward. When the project goes through, all of the incurred costs prior to that get rolled into that. So then everybody pays to them. But until the system goes through, there is some liability, and Paul can probably speak to that. Yes, we pay for those upfront. The landowner's not, the petitioner is not paying for them at that time. The bills come to the watershed district, we keep track of it. But let's just say the project didn't go through. You know, that there is some risk to the petitioner. So good question.
I will say, I think this process by design with some of the old.
That's why we do this.
That's
Yeah.
why this piece in particular, so if the petition gets submitted, you know, the board authorizes survey, and we start talking through what alternatives look like out there. You know, Paul's example, we didn't have a lot of kind of red flags in that. It was a lot of kind of back and forth dialogue, but if you do start running into red flags, there could be some hard conversations about, boy, do we want to keep going or not, you know? So we try and iron that out before we get in, because once you start this is a train that's hard to stop, right? So before we jump on that train, we want to make sure that what we have is going to be acceptable.
So the petitioner, in Paul's case, that's probably, I would assume, why you went door to door. You wanted to know how much support you really had. If you're going to foot this bill and it doesn't go through, you wanted the conversation with your landlord.
Yes, but you still have to have it's a hard conversation, because at the first, what do you want, or don't you want anything, or what could you get out? So you have to find out what people are interested in, but also find out if they're gonna support that if it gets to that point. So it just takes a lot of conversation, somebody or a couple people spearheading it.
So like in the system Paul was mentioning, you know, essentially the petition was received, some data was collected in the field, and we just did some kind of conceptual technical analysis that we could bring to the landowners to say, well, if we did this, this is what your benefit would be. If we did this, this would be what your benefit would be. And it gets to be a lot of kind of back and forth, you know. But
And the petitioner took on the agreement that, okay, he's doing a little bit of overview. I might be responsible for what Zach has performed in the field. We've never had that issue before, because we usually know with the process that we have in place that, yeah, there is a generalized support for something.
big part of that public meeting piece is inviting everybody to see what you're doing. And, you know, it can be a little bit of an echo chamber effect if it's just the petitioners that are coming to those meetings. You really want the people there that could be in, you know, like maybe are more skeptical of it to get their questions answered early rather than kind of through the more formal hearing process. And we still had things we had to work through the hearings, but it was a lot smoother because we went through those steps.
Dave, you could probably answer this. Let's just say we get $10,000 into it, and the petitioner says, this isn't gonna work, I don't have support. And we've used 10,000 of that 34,000. What's that look like? We haven't had that discussion, but.
No, we have not. Just my sort of off the cuff reaction is that, you know, our only investment in maintaining that ditch is that $34,000. Once those dollars are gone for whatever purpose, we're not gonna come back and replenish that. So, I mean.
We
it-
want to be very careful.
So that's kind of why, that's another risk factor, is that it's not a lot, it's not a lot of money in the scheme of things, but it still is there to do some things that might be necessary. But, yeah, just to be clear, is that if you spend that money down and the project's not go forward, well, then that money's,
That's not a very good steward of those dollars. So we want to make sure
Yeah.
that we have, if we need to have 10 of these meetings, that's fine. The watershed district can still facilitate those and still talk through these questions. And because you guys might all go back and think, oh, I should have asked this, or that's okay.
So I have a question if I was a landowner, is there two processes here going on? I mean, essentially you need to get it established as a ditch system first, right?
Yep.
And that's not gonna cost that much money, right?
Well, you still have the preliminary engineers and
Yeah, they're
survey.
okay.
and-
But are you, at the same time, are you gonna try and work on the ditch?
I think what would have to happen,
Or are you just
because
trying to establish it first and then
It's gonna do
so
both.
here's how to fix?
I
So
think
it's
we
all
had-
in one.
yeah, we've had some discussions around that. We think we would have to do some work initially after it be ordered, because just because of the state of the channel likely isn't where, I'm guessing, where the landowners out there want to see it. So we would have to go in after establishment to essentially clean out or construct the project as designed. And then that would set kind of the basis going forward that we'd maintain it to. So, yeah, so it's a little different than, like Paul's example was pretty extensive on the construction side. It was, lots of moving dirt, making channels bigger and wider and things like that, versus this, part of that establishment is likely to go in and, do some cleanup, and I would call it more like repair type work, but essentially get it to the grade line that's agreed to through the hearing process.
For what it's worth, I looked here too. I was off on my numbers. It was a little less than that on the total, and I was like twice as many acres involved. So if you're doing the math, it was a lot cheaper than what that, it was still a significant project, but
Yep.
it was,
Yeah, okay. It's a lot to take in, so
April, can project team money be used in this plan?
Do you have a list or a name or a list of Paul's names for Paul in the project?
say that one more time.
Well, do you have a list of names for a person that is willing to do what Paul did to this? Do we need a person to ramrod?
You do. You need one person who's willing to take the initial step forward. The watershed district really does, in that portion, have to step back and be the support system for that landowner, because it is landowner driven, and that statute, that's very clear in the statute, that as a watershed district administrator or board, this is landowner driven, and we're there to support it.
So would it be better if you had like half a dozen, or does it just have to be?
Paul, how would that have worked for you? Would it have been more helpful to have a couple of landowners go in and get the petition? I think you had 3, didn't you? Or was that maybe project 17? I think 3.
I was the petitioner.
You did that all on your own, okay.
But obviously we talked to enough other people, doctor, hey, you know what? Obviously, there's an issue here, I'm guessing. I don't know, but somebody here has got some drainage issues, right? In this room. So.
I think we did one
Those guys
project.
need to get together and decide what they think they need, and that's really where it starts. It starts from the landowner. And this is what we think we need. Somebody's gotta step up and get the petition going.
We did one project, and I can't remember which one it was, and it was several years ago, where there were at least 3 landowners that went together to get this petition. So the 3 of them shared the bond, and the 3 of them shared the responsibility of that.
Giving the land to sign.
Do you remember which project that was? And then the 3 of them went out door to door and had the discussions, and then it came back with 3 separate sheets of paper of people who had signed it. So that, I think that would be a helpful step. But again, that would be something
We
you
had
work with your
multiple-
attorney.
Had more than one petition sheet out there after the fact. Everybody went to their, either the landowner that you knew, or if, for example, another farmer that rented from so-and-so, and this person, he took that, went to them and had that discussion.
Yeah. Okay.
There was some questions about why the DNR didn't do the transfer. I have a letter here from 7 years ago. I can leave that. Leave it up here for,
Oh.
nobody wants to see. It's pretty much what Dave said.
I'd like to
It's
see
just-
it.
Yeah. We'll just-
The only other thing that has come up to me that I can think of, and you touched on a minute ago, and that is so people understand, if you own a quarter of land and the ditch needs room to work, or essentially the spoil bank or the ditch, it's, the ditch system then establishes a right of way. You still own the land, but there's a right of way, so you still own 160 acres or whatever it be, but your tillable acres would go down accordingly if they needed an acre or whatever it was, am I right? It doesn't change your legal description.
Right, yeah, we don't
The
own land.
watershed doesn't own
Right.
that.
Right, yep, so it's all held through a restricted use easement that's established when the project is established, so.
Which through the buffer law, you already have a restricted use on it anyway.
Yeah.
But it does allow us to go in and access that property. For
In that
maintenance.
case, with the buffer law, in this case, actually, the landowner, if you go off the buffer law, the landowner ended up getting reimbursed for the acres that the buffer law stole from them in the first place.
Yeah, yeah,
So they got reimbursed through the system, where they weren't getting anything. the
A
other-
landowner said it, not me.
If you're wondering how it works,
Okay, okay.
in case you're wondering how I felt about it.
it's a lot of info to take in, so I mean,
But again, if we do have to do maintenance, we've always called the landowner, you know, asked permission, said, hey, this is what we'd like to do. When does this work for you? What's your crop look like? We've never just gone in and accessed somebody's property
Yep.
to do the things that we need to do out there, so.
yeah, and we've gone through, like, when a project's established, I don't foresee it being an issue with this one, but like in Paul's example, where we purchased a temporary easement beyond the ditch right away, we'd go out and stake that. Well, first off, we'd work with the landowners in the winter months, so they kind of knew it was coming. And then in the spring, we tried to go out and stake the extents that we needed to build the ditch. So they could either, depending on the timing of the year of construction, they could either plant something that they could harvest early or else just leave it open essentially. So we don't want to be in the business of wrecking crops when we're out there doing the work, so.
Another thing too, Zach, that we probably didn't touch on, and I'm not sure what this one looks like and how far our MnDOT land goes down,
Mhm.
But in other systems like Paul's case, the ditch system put side inlets in.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, and so that is an opportunity as well for landowners, especially on the downstream end of this one, I'm assuming. There's a
Yeah.
lot of ag land.
Yep.
Where you would have opportunity for your field drainage at that time.
I can't guarantee that we would be able to make it work for this system or not, but in Paul's example, we were actually able to secure grant funds to, I think, covered like 80% of
It
the
was
site.
it was a big deal for them. And there's still grant dollars that we can apply for if that is the case in this system
Yeah,
through
absolutely.
Bowser for those side inlets.
Yeah, if we're doing those environmental improvements you're talking about, yeah, there are grant funds that are available to offset some of those costs, maybe all the costs.
Well, and even through the one watershed, one plan now,
Yeah.
we can get access to some of those dollars to do some of those improvements out there.
I think it was $60-some thousand, I think that.
Yeah,
go towards-
That went off the offset of the construction costs.
I know you haven't done a lot of analysis yet, but I was just curious, the tenant or the portion that's on the DNR public water, are you anticipating needing channel changes there?
If it's anything, it'll be cleaning. So there's a process we'd have to work through with DNR in terms of what that would look like to establish that. So there are going to be some limitations that are allowed through things like DNR and that type of thing. But there is a process to have a legal drainage system that crosses over public water. We have several,
Right.
yeah, several of them in the watershed. We've got an outlet of the project that we showed as an example as a public water, and then the Sandhill ditch system, kind of in the Beltrami over to near Climax is a legal drainage system and also a DNR public water. So,
Project 24 has one on the outlet end.
And one other thing too, just in some full disclosure too, is that we want our engineering staff to work with
Yep.
your team as well, just to make sure that the rights of way and proposed work are not going to impact the restored wetlands, so. and
Yeah, you guys will have a lot to say in the.
Well,
in the-
it's probably not gonna be
as
a
well.
big deal because we designed the restored wetlands to stay away from that main line ditch, so it shouldn't be a big deal, but we just kind of want to make sure that, this new this new easement that's being placed forevermore is gonna work with our forever easement as well, so it's kind of making sure all that fits together.
So they wouldn't, I mean, the DNR, if they did take it over, they're not benefiting from draining water, so you can't assess the range.
Well, that would be an argument that I think the viewers would have to make, but they need that ditch to balance their wetlands as well.
Yes and no, they'll say they don't.
The viewers might say they do.
But if this system's already established, if whoever takes on that property, your benefit is established when the ditch is set. So they're on the hook, whoever that owner is, for whatever future assessments at that rate. They could try to do a redetermination of benefits and then argue that we're not getting any benefits, zero and not assessed. But that's a whole nother, you had another slide there that they were like purple, like after the
But
fact.
you're saying they just have to pay what right now is their assessment for it.
It would be whatever the viewer determines is their benefited value minus any damages.
But
There
if
were.
that ditch wasn't there, I think,
So all the plugging, ditch, that stuff that went on, that's would be considered damage, isn't that?
no, I don't think so. I think it would be more, if that ditch wasn't there, are they able to manage that wetland? And I think they'd have a hard time making that argument. Because they have to be able to drain that wetland somewhere to keep it at the elevation that they need it at for the goals of
So
the wetland.
they'd be assessed benefit the same as.
I think it would be assessed differently than say if this were going through ag land. You know, it would be a different rate. Am I wrong, Dave?
Yeah, I guess what it's come down on your point is that all the restored wetland areas have an elevation for the water.
Yep.
So to the extent the ditch helps maintain that elevation, there would be a benefit for that as well, which I think is the point you're making.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, but then again, is that benefit going to be assessed in agricultural land?
I would say it's gonna probably be different, but I'm not the viewer. I think it would be reasonable to assume there's gonna be different rates.
It would seem logical, but
Yeah.
again, it gets down to the viewers, the process they go through. And again, now, the state land, just because we're the state, we don't get a special deal in that process either, so.
No.
Yeah, and full disclosure, like, it's a unique one, right? I mean, because
Yeah.
it's not just as simple as a wetland that someone's using for recreation or personal enjoyment. It's a wetland that's also creating credit that's worth a lot of money on the open market.
We
That's my
actually,
point. That's my point. They're using it to benefit themselves, so it actually should be.
So it'll be interesting to see how the viewers would approach that.
do we have an example of that on project 17? Because US Fish and Wildlife have that land.
Some
And there,
mitigation acreage though.
oh, it's not.
So,
Yeah, it's a different story.
Yeah, I don't know that we have another example of a wetland in our watershed district that is
So the
assessed.
dollar amounts are high when you're getting.
Very high.
Worth.
Yeah.
So it's really not even comparison.
Yeah, could be.
I'm gonna profess my ignorance on the benefit, the map on page 11.
Yeah.
It looks like the downstream tends to benefit the most. Is that the way?
In this
In-
example,
in
correct?
that example, I can flip back to that. So this system has kind of a lot of things going on. Downstream land was determined to be benefited the most because it's more direct access to the drainage. As you get further away from the system, the rates are reduced, and a lot of that's because, like I mentioned, it's statutory that reviewers shall look at things on a watershed basis, so there's generally a value for anybody that contributes to the system, whether they receive a direct benefit or not from the system. And then also what's maybe a little unique about this one is you see this piece here. This actually cut off a bunch of water that historically went this way. So these people aren't necessarily assessed drainage benefit. That's what they call protection benefit, because some of the water that used to drain on them now goes north into the system. So the viewers really try and take a look at the project really holistically, not just one particular use or another. So
Zach,
Yeah.
they can point out the elevation change from that blue area down.
oh boy, I should have been better prepared, Craig, but
This question came up Monday and you didn't.
yeah, I believe it's,
44, that's where I live.
yep. I'm trying to,
You're on the ridge.
over 100 feet, I would imagine, an elevation change from Highway 9. So
There's that blue area is up there is where I farm and where I live. I have no direct benefit of any of those ditches out west, but my water does go there. But hey, a percentage,
And it's kind of, say, a tenth of proportionate, you know,
yeah,
relative to that, but yeah, there is a.
And to Craig's point, what the viewers would say then is, okay, if your water goes here and you don't want to pay, then we'll plug your water off and you can't use it. Well, then that's why people out on that end ended up having to pay a portion because their water does ultimately get to that outlet.
that area in blue is a lot of shelf. Like, so there's a lot of like area in this area where there's elevation changes.
Yeah, you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That up there. These-
And in that case, you can see like, there is DNR land, couple state wildlife management areas within here. The areas that do drain to the system do pay a rate for contributing to the system.
From a landowner's perspective, again, when you're, some of you in your room, if you're thinking about a certain piece of property and say, well, my water doesn't go there. And it maybe doesn't, I don't know, but, and the same as a renter or whatever it might be, but I can think of 2 instances over the years where, so the landowner, after the viewing got done, they said, well, I don't actually, my water doesn't go that direction. Also, they probably moved them maybe from direct benefits to protection benefits or something, you know? So their amount that they would pay is less. The ditch system got done, and then after the fact, they're like, man, that's a really good system, I want to drain into it. You opted out of it, so you either gotta go back, I think, and pay, you gotta go back and pay for what you did the first time, or you just don't get to drain into it.
It's
Because you bought the
expensive.
system, if you didn't pay for it, you don't necessarily get to use it.
I can think of a couple instances. In fact, we just had one probably 4 years ago.
Yep.
We had a project that was built in the early 2000s. And the landowner at that time was not assessed into it, didn't want to be. Now he's seeing how tiling came out. He wanted to take his tile water to the system and our board said, you're not paying to use that system, you cannot. So in order for him to do that, it was very expensive. We had to go back and calibrate how much money the construction cost would have costed that particular parcel. And I added up all of the maintenance that we had paid to the system. And then what his rate would be. And for him, he had to go back and pay everything he didn't pay, even all of the maintenance on the system, in order to be established into it after the fact. And that was all at his expense, plus the engineering fees, the legal fees that he had incurred to get it going in. So if you ever think you might want to use the system, it is much more affordable to do it at the time. But we have had landowners say, nope, plug my drainage, I don't want to use it. Well, that is your choice.
Better run.
Thank you for coming, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
Any other questions being called?
You know, I think we can probably convene if there's no more questions, but we'll stick around here. If you guys want to visit, there's maps. Make sure you sign your sign-in sheet though, because we have to keep a record of who attended these meetings. If that's okay, have some donuts, have some coffee. Oh, and then also, check our website for updates. We'll put notes of this meeting out there, so you can share them. Sand Hill Watershed, I have a card here with it written on there. Yep.